The night shift always had a strange, oppressive quiet. The building, an office tower during the day, felt abandoned after sundown. The fluorescent lights above me flickered occasionally, buzzing softly as though reminding me I wasn't entirely alone. Outside the glass lobby doors, the parking lot was a patchwork of dim yellow pools cast by the old streetlights. Beyond that, the world dissolved into darkness. It was just past 2 a.m. when I first heard the sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, a faint, rhythmic tapping against the glass. I glanced up from my phone, half expecting to see a tree branch or maybe a loose sign swaying in the night air. Instead, I saw her. She was standing just beyond the lobby doors, motionless, her figure framed by the dim glow of the streetlights. My breath caught in my throat. There was something about her that was wrong. Her dress was the first thing I noticed. It was red, deep crimson, the kind of shade that would be stunning under normal circumstances. But it was soaked through, clinging to her body in heavy, damp folds. The fabric glistened in the light, water dripping steadily from the hem and pooling at her feet. Her long dark hair hung limp and plastered to her face and shoulders, each strand glistening with droplets that caught the light like tiny crystals. Her skin was pale, too pale, almost translucent, as if the blood had been drained. From her, shadows pooled in the hollows of her cheeks and under her eyes, which were dark and glassy like two bottomless pits. Those eyes were what unnerved me the most. They were too intense, too unblinking, and they seemed to lock onto mine with an unnatural stillness. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable, and then she knocked again. The sound was deliberate and too loud in the otherwise silent lobby. "Can I use your phone?" she asked. Her voice wasn't right. It was soft, but distorted, as if it were filtered through water. The words gurgled faintly, each syllable heavy and wrong. My stomach churned, and I felt a strange, instinctual urge to run, but my legs refused to move. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the buzzer that unlocked the door. Something deep inside me screamed not to let her in, but I couldn't. Leave her out there. What if she was hurt? I pressed the buzzer, the sharp click of the lock releasing echoing in the empty space. She opened the door and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the cold. It wasn't just a chill. It was biting, unnatural, the kind of cold that cuts straight to your bones. My breath misted in front of me, and the air smelled faintly of salt water and damp earth. She walked slowly, her bare feet making wet, squelching sounds against the tile. Water dripped steadily from her dress, leaving a dark, spreading trail behind her. The puddle at her feet was already growing, the edges of it creeping outward unnaturally, almost as if it were alive. As she approached the counter, I noticed more details, details that made my skin crawl. Her hands hung limply at her sides, the fingers unnaturally long and thin, with nails that were cracked and discolored. Her arms glistened with water, droplets sliding down her skin and vanishing into the spreading puddle below. Her face was even, worse up close. Her lips were blue, tinged with an almost black hue at the edges, as if they'd been starved of oxygen. Her cheeks were hollow, her skin stretched tightly over the sharp bones beneath, and her eyes, God, her eyes, they were impossibly dark, deeper than any shadow I'd ever seen, and they seemed to pull me in, swallowing me whole. The phone, she said again, her voice softer now, but still carrying that strange, gurgling quality. I nodded mutely and handed her the landline. When our hands brushed, I felt it. Her skin was freezing, damp, like something pulled from the depths of a lake. Her grip lingered for a moment, too long, and I couldn't stop the shudder that ran through me. She dialed a number, her fingers moving slowly, almost hesitantly. I couldn't hear the dial tone, couldn't hear anything except the faint drip, drip, drip of water hitting the floor. It wasn't my fault, she whispered suddenly, her voice cracking. The words sent a chill down my spine. What wasn't your fault? I asked, my voice barely audible. She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes seemed to darken further, the inky blackness spreading outward until they swallowed the whites entirely. Tears began to spill down her cheeks. Not normal tears, but thick, clear droplets, like water. They dripped steadily, joining the puddle that was now spreading toward me, dark and shimmering, unnaturally. It wasn't my fault, she said again, louder this time. Her voice had changed, deepened, and now it gurgled like water bubbling up from a drain. The air grew colder still, frost creeping along the edges of the counter. The puddle at her feet began to ripple, small waves forming and lapping at the edges. The lights overhead flickered, casting the room into brief moments of total darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Her body began to dissolve, blurring at the edges like a mist dissipating in the morning sun. Her form flickered, her features smearing like a wet painting until she was nothing more than a haze. The puddle, the frost, the cold, they all vanished with her. But her voice lingered. It wasn't my fault, it whispered, faint and distant, like an echo carried on the wind. I sat there, trembling, the sound of her voice looping endlessly in my mind. The next morning, I checked the security footage, hoping for some rational explanation. There was none. The cameras showed me sitting alone, handing the phone to empty air. There was no woman, no water, no frost, nothing. I quit the night shift after that, but sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I still feel her presence. I hear her voice, faint but unmistakable, whispering from the shadows. It wasn't my fault, and I wonder, who or what is she blaming? And what happens when she decides it is someone's fault?